sense, noticing what you do, and then trying to figure out what that is. So you'll have fantasies about the ideal. That often happens in a romantic relationship, especially at the beginning of it. Because you project your idealization onto the person that you're romantically attracted to. That's the projection of an archetype. So Jung would say, the woman will project an animus onto the man. The animus is her conceptualization of what the ideal man is. It's unconscious because it's rooted in fantasy. And the man will be in concordance with that projection in some areas. Those are the areas where she likes him, by the way. And will be discordant in other areas. And that's the areas where she constantly disappoints him as the relationship develops. So the projection is there in part to help the person understand who it is that they're dealing with, because when you meet someone, you have to assume something about them. It's the same as projection. You have to assume something about them, and if you find them fascinating, which is what happens if you fall in love, maybe it's because they smell good or they're symmetrical or something, you immediately assume that, well, those things really matter. You immediately assume that they embody the ideal. It's an oversimplification, but the oversimplification has a basis, and the basis is, if it's interesting to me, it must be close to the ideal. Well, yeah, except the person that you're going out with, attracted to, is warped and bent and flawed and twisted in, 300 ways, and you'll find that out soon enough, just as they will about you. And that often just blows the relationship into bits, because the person will say, well, she wasn't who I thought she was. It's like, well, whoever said she was who you thought she was? It's like, where did you get the misapprehension that she was going to be who you thought she was? God, what do you know? You're led around by your sense of smell and your ability to detect symmetry. It's like, that's not very sophisticated.
Hi, today I want to talk a little bit about projection in relationships, romantic ideals in general. The clip which you just watched is from Jordan Peterson's 2014 personality lecture, Carl Jung Part 1. So it's basically about Carl Jung and his viewpoints, and we get a lot of insight into relationships. Now you might be wondering, how is it that I can have a better relationship, in particular intimate relationships? Thousands of years of human civilization, and yet we have more relational problems than ever before, so why is this the case? If you take some time to check out Jordan Peterson's lectures, you will note that he makes a big deal about culture, being part of culture, and how culture helps us to fit in and get on with things. In this clip here, Peterson is talking about Jungian psychology. And first of all, we have to understand when he's talking about male and female. From a Jungian point of view, the male's subconscious mind is feminine and is called the anima, A-N-I-M-A. And the female subconscious mind is masculine and called the animus, A-N-I-M-U-S. Now, in all things to do with depth psychology, we can't 100% prove it, but anecdotally we can see that there appears to be at least a grain of truth in it, in that we do appear to have romantic ideals hard written into our subconscious minds. Peterson jokingly notes that we are pulled around by our interest and symmetry and our sense of smell, which is a bit of a joke. He's basically saying how people fall in love by how somebody looks and how they smell, which are very, very small physical attributes, but there is some truth in that, of course, to some degree. Now, this is not wholly true, but to some degree, different people find different people to turn on. For example, some men like blondes, some men like women with big breasts, some men like brunettes, some men like women with small breasts, and so on. And of course, while a lot of women will say they like a type of man, in reality they are also influenced by superficial things like height and build and so on. Not so long ago, in a nationwide survey in the USA of what women like, they interviewed thousands of women, and the overall ideal man that came up as a consensus of these thousands of women was a man who was 6 feet tall, slim, not skinny, not fat, not usually muscled, with wide shoulders and a small waist, a nice bottom, brown or black hair with blue eyes. Kinda sounds like Keanu Reeves in his prime. Of course, there are many variabilities in what people find attractive, but certain patterns tend to repeat themselves. And it's not just physical. We'll also find people attractive as in their personality and certain traits about them, which might fit in with the ideals, of course, that we have. Interestingly, when we start dating somebody, often we don't find them that attractive. And strangely, after a short while, we do find them attractive. Why is that the case? Well, it's the case that we're already projecting something onto them. We're now starting to filter out the negative and enhance the positive. So most people will start a relationship just thinking the person's nice, but after a while you start falling in love. Now, of course, you might fall in love instantly, or you might fall in love over time. Either way, it's actually a projection of certain ideals within yourself, and those ideals are projected onto the other person, and the falling in love is a little bit of a fantasy when we think about it. Another interesting aspect here is that if you think about the ideal female and the ideal male, they're basically, we are perhaps just projecting ideals onto another person. So, and this might spread out beyond relationship and go into the area of, things like any idealization. If we really like somebody, our ideal friend, our ideal sibling, our ideal employer, employee, coach, etc. Our ideal movie star, for example, or anybody we feel is a bit of a hero. Well, perhaps we're actually seeing traits in them which are actually in us. We're projecting onto them, and we're actually seeing that they seem to be like ideal aspects of ourselves, in which case, perhaps like Narcissus, all love is self-love. So maybe whenever we like somebody, we just like them because they're kind of similar to some aspect of ourselves, which is a little bit disconcerting to say the least. Now, let's take another approach to understanding this topic. Let's look at the romantic dream, for example. I'm not talking about the sexy dream, but the romantic dream. A romantic dream, it might have sexual elements, but it will definitely have sentimental elements and a sense of an overwhelming feeling of joy, of union, of joining with another person, of expansion, etc. And then you wake up and say, wow, it's just a dream. This is silly because it's not real, it's a fantasy. But then let's say you meet somebody, start falling in love with them, but you start finding it's the same joy, the same expansion, the same feeling of connectedness and so on. It's the same. So in other words, the ideal person that you have in a romantic dream, which is not real, this is a fantasy, you will have the same feeling of fall in love when you actually fall in love with an actual human being. So in other words, clearly it's a projection of an ideal onto that person. So whether we fall in love slowly or quickly, we are basically putting on a bunch of projections onto that person. And what that means is that we emphasize the positives and we reduce the negatives, plus we might project a few things over and beyond. Let's take another way of looking at this. Let's look at the aspect of the broken heart. If you've ever had one of those, you'll notice that it feels like someone has pulled their heart out of your chest, thrown it on the floor and danced all over it. And quite possibly your partner will say the same about you. But doesn't make logical, rational sense. After all, the relationship has failed. A human being, a flawed, ordinary person who you were romantically involved with is no longer involved with you. Surely get over it. Find other fish within the sea. But as you know, whenever you talk to somebody who has a relational fail, usually they want that fish, not another fish. And it seems odd as to why they love that person so much, and the person to you, as an outsider, is very ordinary. And the reason why is not just that the relationship has failed, the idealization has failed. Because this idealized relationship that you have, this idealized partner, is more than the attributes of the person that you're actually dating or married to. That ideal person represents balanced aspects of our own inner self, some aspect of ourselves that we're trying to find. And so those idealizations often help us. If you talk to a lot of people, they'll tell you that when they fell in love, they became a better version of themselves. Sometimes this is a fantasy, but often this is actually true. Because the idealizations, when we find this ideal person, it helps us mature. It gives us emotional stability and support. Even if it's only a fantasy, it helps us become a bigger and better version of ourselves. So clearly and obviously when a relationship fails, it's not just that you're not with that person, but the idealization has been pulled out of you. So you literally feel like you've lost an aspect of yourself. It's really quite shocking. So we should have a lot of sympathy and empathy for people who are in this emotional distress. The very idealization process, which makes Mr. or Mrs. Right, results in an over-appreciation of the person in the first place. Have you ever noticed how a person, when they're falling in love, wax lyrical about their lover? They could be a friend, they could be a family member. The way they talk about them, by the time they finish, you think the person's 10 feet tall, gorgeous and great personality. And then eventually you meet this Mr. Perfect or Mrs. Perfect, and you realize they're not perfect at all. They're very, very ordinary people, and they've got failings, and maybe you're not good looking, and you realize that your friend or relative is really looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses. And the reason why is because it's projection. So what's happening here with the projection is that we're boosting all the positive thoughts and feelings about the person, while reducing all the negative things, and we're even projecting other things which don't even belong to them, idealizations, attributes that they don't even have. So whichever way you look at it, what actually happens is that when we're in love with somebody, it's not really objective, it's subjective. And also that eventually must end. Either the relationship will fail, in which case there's a sudden break off of this idealized person, which has caused a lot of suffering. Or in the case of a long-term relationship, eventually the idealization will go down, and we will realize that that person is not so perfect. So we often see people in long-term relationships wondering, what happened to the magic? Where's the person I originally married or dated? Why isn't it there anymore? How can we rekindle it? And the sad side is you're not going to rekindle it. It's not possible to rekindle it. Another example of this will be the 7-year itch, which many people report that for 7 years in a marriage things are good and things are bad. It's not that things are bad, it's that the idealization is gone. So the idealization, it gets you to bond with this other person, but it has a shelf life. Now, there are useful aspects. On a very simple level, the idealization gets people together and have babies and stuff like that. But on a deeper level, as noted earlier, the idealization also helps us to grow and mature as a human being, because there's something about bonding with another being that's very important. And although we might be bonding with with the other person to some degree, we have fantasies about it, there is still a nurturing and maturing effect in relationships. So the idealization can be useful, but ultimately an idealization is always a projection from myself onto the other person. It ignores the reality of the other person. Now, the sad aspect of this is that the person you think you're in love with, you're not really in love with that person at all. It's a fantasy that you're really in love with. You don't know them that much. But there is a flip side. And the flip side, or the positive side, is that as the idealizations go, you see the person as they are, and they see you as you are. And the good side with this is that there's a potential for growth. There's a potential. The relationship does not have to end, but you're going to have to renegotiate the relationship. So there is a growth possibility, and this is the thing that is not so obvious. We tend to think when idealizations end that the relationship is over, and often it is, but it doesn't have to be. Because without the idealization, you're seeing the person as they are. Now the problem is, if you just rely upon everything being very nice and loving, and think that's enough to keep a relationship going, then you're going to fall flat on your face. But if there's a foundation, if something's already been built, then even when the idealizations go, the love is still there, but it's not idealized love. You're seeing the person as they are and accepting them as they are. So really the onus early on in a relationship is to get to know the other person, not just the fantasies about them, and find a common place, as it were, common rules, values that you're going to live by, etc., and work at building the foundation of a relationship. So when the idealizations eventually do wind down, there is a genuine relationship there. And this opened up the idea of mystery, the mystery of when the idealization is clear, while we might not like it, there's a mystery of who that person is. Just like you're a mystery to them, they're a mystery to you. And in many ways, we're mysteries to ourselves. So there's a potentiality in the mystery. And clearing away from the idealization gives that as a possibility. So just remember, it doesn't have to end, but it is a new beginning. And it's up to you what you make of it.